Hey, how y'all doing tonight? I just finished with this grave and was just giving my bones a rest. I like working at night. It's nice and peaceful. The name is MT Graves. I'm the caretaker and digger here at the graveyard. So did you stop by to hear a yarn or two? I have some terror-filled tales that will set your mind racing and have your hair on end. Well, find you a spot and get comfortable and I'll tell you a story that will keep you up at night, staring into the darkness wondering if you will be next. It was late summer in the North Woods. The two men were finished making their rounds, checking fence, and looking for lost cattle. After a long day, they are heading home. Walking along, they cut through the woods. Jeb told his younger brother Ash that there was a small opening ahead, that would cut a few minutes from their journey home. They worked for the same man since they were teenagers when their parents died, and they were more or less adopted into the rancher's family. The first thing they noticed when entering the clearing was blood. It was everywhere. Splattered on the trees, the grass, in pools, everywhere. At first, they figured it was a pack of wolves. They seen it sometimes, they can't scavenge and start hunting deer. The worst was when they breed with feral dogs. But this wasn't like that. Something had run up on a den of deer. Wolves won't attack a den, neither will coyotes for that matter, because they'd get too much of a fight from the deer. There were 3 bodies, just torn apart. You'd see a head here, a leg here, and a torso there. Predators don't do that. They don't leave behind scraps. What had done this hadn't done it for food. The two men looked around and discussed it. They finally decided it was most likely a pack of feral dogs. They knew they would have to get rid of the pack before they started attacking the herd. And with such a fresh kill, it was best to track them now. With full bellies, they wouldn't be far. They began following the tracks. It wasn't hard, they just followed the blood. One of them bled a deer before it left, or it dragged part of it with them. There was smears and drops of blood that a blind man could follow. The sun was finally down, so they used their flashlights to follow the trail. After a little while they started hearing noises. Like trees snapping and things running fast. Both of them had been in a lot of wood, all over the world, and have never heard noises like that. It wasn't just animals running, they heard animals screaming. Deer, fox, rabbits, raccoons, and birds, just scared. It was 10 or 11 o'clock at night, except the fox and some birds, nothing was supposed to even be awake. But they weren't just awake, they were moving. They saw birds fly straight into trees just trying to get out of there. The two brothers came up on a pack of coyotes, nearly shotting a couple thinking it was what they were looking, but then they saw they were running right past them, without even notice. They started to think this wasn't such a good idea. Then some deer did the same. Some rabbits, and squirrels, foxes, even a couple wild hogs. These things were supposed to be eating each other and the only thing they cared about was getting away from there. What were they tracking? It wasn't something they were supposed to see, something that makes other animals forget what they were and ignore each other in flight. They had seen something like this in animals running away from a forest fire, but then never this reckless. Plus they couldn't smell smoke. They wondered if they should just go home. Just report what they saw, and let someone else handle it. But like most people, it was against their nature. This was their home, they knew every foot of it. They had their rifles that could take care of any animal in the country. They were just tired, and letting their fears run away with them. They just laughed it off and kept on following the blood trail. They finally walked into an open valley. It was normally a cornfield, but it wasn't in use this year, so it was just flat dirt. While walking through, they saw the tracks. A lot of the animals fleeing the forest had paved over the land. The tracks were shallow, but numerous. So they follow the blood, and it doesn't take them long to find where it is. Back into the woods on the other side of the field, back in a shaded hollow. They get within 50 yards, and could hear this noise. A screeching kinda sound. It was sort of made up of two different sounds. One was a high-pitched screech, another was a low-pitched growl. Within 20 yards, they hear another sound, like paper being torn apart, while someone was swishing water in a bucket back and forth. Jeb looks at Ash, kneels down, and whispers. Ash was to stay behind him, 'cause they're about to corner them. Any animal will fight when it's cornered, especially when it's a predator. The plan is to sneak up while they're eating, start shooting, and then keep shooting till nothing moves anymore. And if one of them gets on either one, it's the other's job to shoot or stab it to get it off them. So Jeb walks up, and Ash right behind him, just a bit to his side, so Ash could see but also cover him. They wish to this day they hadn't. It was leaning over a carcass, tearing off its flesh, and throwing what it doesn't nibble at aside. There's blood all over, glistening in the moonlight. It was pale white with fur, human looking, but not quite human. It had arms and legs like a human, but it sat like a monkey, hunched over. It was maybe 5 foot tall, and its hands weren't normal, it had long fingers with claws at the end. When they see that, it made them hesitate. He wasn't about to fire on a person, if that was what it was. So Jeb cleared his throat, to try and get it to turn around. At that sound, all the noise just ceased. True silence. 2 seconds, 2 very long seconds, nothing made any noise. Which made it all the louder when it turned around. It made this shrill cry, when its yellow eyes saw them. It leaped upon Jeb. He got a shot off, but missed. It was on him, tearing parts of him off. Ash started shooting it, point blank, but it barely bled. He got off 5 hollow points at point blank range, and then Ash started hitting it with the butt of the gun. But it wasn't budging. It didn't even register that he was there. It clawed at Jeb, taking off bits of his flesh. It started on his torso, ripping off the skin, his chest, then it moves up. It tore out his throat, it tore off his nose, and eyes. Then it started digging in, ripping off the bottom half of his jaw, the little bones and that tube in the neck, then his ribs. It was too much for Ash. He began running. By running I mean running faster than he's ever run before or after. Sound came back to Ash. It was following him. He now understood why the animals were acting like that from earlier. Time seemed to stand still. He ran, and that was all he knew to do. Run. He ended up back in the part of woods from earlier today, before finding the bloody scene. His mind was saying over and over, Go towards the ranch house, go home, it's half a mile away. He can hear this thing, screeching and moaning. He heard tree branches crack and get thrown around. It sounds like someone's taking an axe to every single tree it pass, it's cracking so loud and often, but he didn't look back. Finally, he tripped into a pile of chopped wood. Ash looked up and there was his boss and a bunch of his buddies, drinking brandy around a fire. He was hysterical as they rushed over. Ash was screaming for them to call for help, and they look at him trying to understand what was going on. "What is that on your back?" one asked. Just as he said it, Ash realized. One of those god-awful wool shirts his brother wore everywhere. It was what was left of his brother. Most of his head, his torso, but nothing after the waist. He must have snatched it from the ground as he bolted from the beast. Suddenly they hear it. Screeching. In a flash of white, it grabs what remained of Jeb. Ash began fighting the beast, crying, 'cause he thought they can still save his brother, somehow, but his brother had been gone before he ever picked him up. The others picked Ash up and threw him inside the main house. All of them are inside, and began bolting doors and windows, while getting guns ready. The boss asking Ash what happened. But he rambled. The boss pieced enough of it together to understand that there was something dangerous there. The fire was still lit just outside, and through the window shutters they could look and see the creature. They could see it walking in front of the fire. Not knowing what it is, one of them says it looks like an ape. Suddenly, something crashes through the window. A few of them shoot at it, but it wasn't the beast. It was our dog. Just the body, though. Not his head or legs. They start pushing things in front of doors and windows, then they hear something round the back. One of the guys yelled that the doors in back were open. Just then they heard wood getting ripped apart. It banged around some more, but then it got quiet. Not silent, like it was before. They could hear it move around some, and the guys were talking, making sure the guns were ready. Someone hands Ash one. No sooner did he cock the hammer back did he hear something shatter upstairs. Then they all heard it screech again, except now it was louder, and it didn't echo and fade out. Because it was inside the house now. They all rushed to the one door leading to the kitchen. The kitchen was the oldest part of the house and was built with old solid logs. It has one door and no windows. They started throwing salting and drying meats out the door that they had worked on earlier in the day, hoping that would satisfy its hunger, as that thing came into the previous room. Ash and 4 men slammed the door. But the creature got its hand through. Someone with a rifle took care of that. Putting the barrel right up to its wrist and pulled the trigger. Cut its hand off, clean. The door slammed shut, and the boss placed a large plank bolting the door. The hand looked like a cross between a bear paw and a human hand. Long fingers, white fur, and long claws. Ash just stared at it while pushing his body against the bottom of the door. That shot only made it mad. It started pushing and clawing on the door. The men were on one side, pushing as best as they could, and it was on the other, doing the same. That wood just wasn't going to hold. "Someone, keep your heads down," someone yelled. Suddenly the top half of the door is just gone. Ash's ears were ringing, and there are splinters everywhere. 2 or 3 of them just unloaded their guns into the top of that door. Some of the men pushed a table over the hole. The beast stopped its assault, but could be heard tearing and roaring inside the house beyond the door. When the morning light finally started to shine, the noise ceased. The men slowly came out from their hiding place. Ash was still glued to that door. Well, what was left of it anyway? Nothing was found, but the place was wrecked. Only a little flesh and woolen material was left of Jeb. The authorities were called and everything was relayed. They took the remains of Jeb, and the creature's clawed hand. They said an investigation would be conducted. But the men who lived through the nightmare was through. All the men except the owner and Ash left to who knows where. The boss put his ranch and livestock up for sale that evening, and he took Ash with him to his sisters who lived in the southwestern desert. After a few months while building a new ranch far away from the North Woods, they received a letter about the investigation. It was ruled a bear attack. Most likely rabid. They just looked at each other, no words were spoken. They went back to building their ranch house. They call it a ranch house, but their neighbors call it a bunker built of steel, with bars over every opening. They are just paranoid preppers, they say. Hope that didn't scare you too much. Just something to think about when you're in the dark, or when the power goes out. Well, I guess I've rested enough. I have more customers to attend to. Seems business is booming. See ya around. Eventually.